Well, hello there, everybody. A couple minutes late, and that's because the guest that I have is one that I have, been a fan of his ever since I was introduced to you. David, it's been a while, I'm sure. Anyway, welcome everybody. It's Thursday, and this is going to be an exciting hour. There's just no doubt about it. So sit down, strap in, put your 5-point seatbelt on, and because we're going to be talking about some of the realities that have been spoken about in the past that are now here and what is coming forth. And I think you're going to find this hour amazing. So without further ado, I think many of you know who David DuByne is. If not, go over to Adapt 2030 and subscribe and make it a reality, and you can catch up on what's going on. David, thank you. By the way, speak in favor over everybody. Nothing missing, nothing broken. And by the way, Ryder just dropped into the chat room. It's good to see you, Ryder.
Excellent.
Tomorrow, by the way, what a great segue. Ryder and Jay Wilder will be on the channel. We're going to be doing a live show. They have a new documentary on a subject that is still one that brings controversy some 60-something years later, and a JFK assassination. So tune in tomorrow. By the way, the movie is now on Amazon Prime, so check it out. So David is plugging one of our good buddies out there. And so how are you doing, my friend?
Yeah, good. That was just another flash of lightning. So if anything happens, hold on, I'll try to get back, because the last storm surge that came through, the last set of, wow, it just knocked out our internet for a while. I was going to try to get over to the Starlink and get it up, but it was raining too heavy to even deploy that. So, I mean, that was a serious front that just rolled through. And for those of you out there today, we're going to talk about things that are on a timeline in the heavens that will directly affect the earth. And then you have to look at why, we see the media and the elite and these more old money families positioning themselves to try to ride through this and still maintain control on the backside. Now, speaking of Ryder, there were 5 of us on there with Jay and with Penny Kelly and Wayne, you and myself. I was talking about some of these celestial events, but I didn't really have the graphics there. But today I did put them all together. So, if we can take a look at where the planets sit in their orbits and how that would disturb society, and what's really the catalyst for these societal collapses is the main thing to get at. And if you knew that onset date, the intensity of the the ramp up, for a better term, coming into the cycle, when it would really be the heaviest, where you couldn't deflect any longer from the populace because they were going to see it with their own eyes. Like, what kind of things would you put in motion and in play to create excuses for the phenomena or the events seen?
Wow. Yeah, because there's no doubt that we're in something. It's not coming. It's here. And as you were talking, back in my days when I was in politics, Ronald Reagan always comes to mind, because Oliver North and all the controversy that happened around there. But Oliver North knew some information, and it is said that they told President Reagan that the day that we're living in now was coming. And it is said that President Reagan he said, well, what can we do? The answer was nothing.
Nothing.
Henry Kissinger, going back to Nixon, in his famous speech, symposium, whatever you want to call it, he predicted that the day that we're living in, that food will become the most powerful weapon. And then today, David, I put a little PowerPoint together just to kind of get us in, because the question I see is this: are we in a scheme of depopulation, as Vice President Kamala Harris said on Friday? Are we in a predetermined path? Is this a cycle? Is this man-made? I mean, these are the questions that, it's here. So what's going on? And if you allow me, I want to just share this real quick with everybody. So give me 1 second as I pull it up here. So there is something going on, the food supply. The question is, are food processing plants being set intentionally? If you look at the map, it would appear something is taking place. In the headlines, fire after fire after fire. These are all food processing plants. And I believe it's been since 2021, it's over 200 of these fires have now taken place in the United States. We look at the food supply. Poultry is a very big one. Last year alone, over 350 million chickens were culled due to viruses, bacteria, etc. The question now that is being asked, are we entering into an era of where we're seeing food terrorism? Some could say that what Russia did in bombing the ports in the Black Sea, cutting, 60 million metric tons of grain, much needed, out of the food supply, continuing. The vast amount of stories worldwide of food being shown to be contaminated, weather events, wiping out crops. And it's not just in one season, but it seems to be in multiple seasons. Drought. Here where I live in the Midwest, we're in what they call extreme drought. The harvest this year is only going to be apparently 25% of what they were anticipating. Just 2 weeks ago, we had the Derecho move across the heartland of where we get our wheat and what have you, destroying, I don't know how many acres that was in
1
there.
million.
It was 1 million. Thank you, sir. So we see this. There's now reports of a new avian flu that is apparently now infecting poultry here in the United States. Please excuse me. So we know that this is happening. Cattle, stories of new disease hitting cattle in other countries. Here in the United States alone, it is. This story I found interesting. In Canada, they now have one of the largest processing plants for insects. This apparently will be the main protein in the not too distant future. The World Economic Forum, UN, said current lifestyles and consumption patterns of the affluent middle class involving high meat intake and the use of fossil fuels, electrical appliances, home and workplace air conditioning, and suburban housing are not sustainable. This is where we find ourselves today. And it's interesting because you sent some graphics that I have already ready to go, but I'd just like to get your take on, because you have been kind of the watchman on the tower, telling people to prepare for this. And here we are. So love to get your point of view on this, David.
One of many saying, hey, you need to get prepared. Now, that last slide that you showed there, what they want to remove from you, meat, electrical, this sort of thing, fossil fuels, you can create all that on your own property. If you have a homestead or you have some, you can create most of that. Now, distilling, if you understand and know how to distill, that's a motor fuel. That's called ethanol. That's, back in the day when Prohibition rolled through, that was to stop farmers from creating their own farm fuels and running their dual fuel tractors to get them on a paid metered system. Because at that point, before Prohibition and leading up into it, nearly 100% of anything farm driven machinery wise was all made on the farm ethanols. Like, they understood that whole process of distilling. And if we go to the meat, you're either going to raise your chickens, you can have a sheep or two, you can have lambs, cow, pig, whatever, but it's going to be on your own property. And then if you look at the electrical needs to run fans and that sort of thing, you would definitely want to have some solar panel, battery backups, etc., which is my weak point. I'm learning that more and more. I know a guy is like a whiz at this thing, like 100 times more prepped out, and I'm trying to learn from him. But some of these things we are going to need to take back. And if you can get that under your own control and under your own roof, that's going to take quite some time for it to actually swing out to you and, fully somebody walking into the house to try to disrupt that. But then again, if it gets to that point, they know there'll be confrontation every single time. If it really does, and I really pray it does not, if it comes to the point where they're actually physically going on people's land to seize their meat supplies, to seize their solar panels and electrical supplies, every single home, every single farm they go to is going to be met with resistance.
That would be
I
very
don't think it'll ever
foolish.
go that far.
Now we have solar panels. We have 30 of them. And I got to tell you, we don't pay electric. We sell it to and that's a rigged system. But anyway, I'm a real, I don't have to worry about what's coming down the line. We're feeding the line.
And the food fire plants, those are up to over 1,200 burned facilities now. The number before 200, it was astounding anyway, because it would be like 2 a year or something would be like industry or insurance industry standards would be 2 to 3 per year over the last like 30 years since the late 1990s. It was about 2, maybe 3 on an exceptionally what happened here. But yeah, in the last 2 years, we get 1,200 of these fires. So it does seem like a lot of it's purposeful. And for me, one thing I try to get to the bottom of it in the videos that I do is, I saw this new article come out that says 13 countries have pledged to cut their food production to try to meet emission targets with nitrogen. For me, that is just an excuse and a story out there to explain away why there won't be as much food due to these natural cycles. Because you have to have an excuse every time something comes in. So to say in advance, 13 countries, it was like Argentina, Brazil, United States, Germany, like some major players in grain production, we're going to cut their grain production down to literally nil. But just even putting that out, even if they don't move on it, even just putting that out into the headlines, when there is a scarcity of food, they can just revert back to that and go, I heard about, they're going to now point at the politician. They can never come clean that it's a natural cycle, because the moment the globe understands it's a natural cycle, game over. They can never bring it back ever again. It is dead on arrival. It will never come back. Once people realize it's natural, you can't like pull the wool over their eyes again.
Well, that brings up, the question then, if this is a cycle, and it appears that this has happened in our past, the rise and fall of civilizations are merely timed to, of all things, the climate. I mean, humans are not what we would call natural to this environment. We have to alter the environment in order to survive. So if this is, but it at the same time, if that is the case, that we're seeing this as a natural cycle, I personally think that it has to do a lot with the magnetic excursion that we're currently under. I don't think our species was around the last time this happened, and it's obviously shifting weather patterns, I think, which are tied to magnetic lines, etc. But do you think so? I guess my question is, why do this appear to be man-made? Why does it seem that we're exasperating what is already taking place?
Because there's an excuse behind it. See, when we look at CO2 levels across time, we're at nearly the lowest. We're near extinction.
You need CO2 to grow plants.
Levels.
I mean, that's the insanity.
Yeah, that is insanity. Literally, we're near the edge of the death of all plant life on the planet, all animal life, all sea life, and they still want to take it down. So anywhere between 180 and 280 parts per million. They don't have it tagged down to exactly 181.5 parts per million and everything dies. It's a slow process of grind where this photosynthesis or this chemical reaction stops at this level of reduction of CO2. That chlorophyll uptake stops at this level. It's basically how pesticides work and herbicides. So it'll disrupt the function. So the lack of CO2 at a certain parts per million will disrupt the function, just like an herbicide would. It disrupts something like chlorophyll production or water uptake or respiration from a leaf. It's the same thing. The CO2 at different levels will disrupt different functions. It's not like it hits one magic number and then everything just stops. There's these layers of cascade downward. And for me, anything that can get CO2 higher up in the atmosphere, 500 parts per million, 1,200 parts, what they do in greenhouses, the better for us. More plant production, more food production.
Means more food. I mean,
more
because
food.
the way that we're heading now, wow. I mean, again, I mentioned what happened to this war over in Europe with Ukraine and Russia. Now, Russia, they said they were going to do it, and they did it. And so they've apparently bombed out one of the main facilities that provide grain to the world. As a result, one of the countries in Africa said, but wait a minute, that was our grain, which means our people most likely will be starving.
Well, they're going to try to route that overland now. See, I was reading a couple things this morning. I was reading RT and Al Jazeera, which gives you a different glimpse on the news than the American outlets. So the reason, and I'm not pro-Russia and going, hey, rah, rah, or anything. I'm just explaining what they said, why Russia bombed those facilities. Because they knew the U.S. was going to try to run their ships in, and they were going to try to run ships in, commercial grain ships, on purpose to cause the conflict and either hit or cause them to fire on the ships. Because they were going to go in on purpose anyway and say, you can't stop us. So what they did is they just blew the facilities out, so there's nowhere to load anywhere. So then all of a sudden, all the insurers at the same time said, no more insurance for commercial grains. But if you had military warships trying to escort a grain carrier in there, that would just be the flashpoint for that to happen. So they just nipped it in the bud. There's nothing to even go load. So they're going to be, what are you going to do? Take two warships in, side by side on a grain carrier to a loading facility that doesn't exist any longer. At that point, people could see through the charade. Yeah. But see, that was the intention of the U.S. government, was to run it through with military escort and cause the conflict and make Russia absolutely stop those ships under fire or blocking, which would create the incidents for then the escalation through NATO.
When you see, that's all insanity.
Russia backpedaled that a bit.
We all know where this, and again, it's all tied in. Everything in here is tied in. I want to, and one of the things that you talked about when we were on Ryder's show, and it's one that I have consistently kept. You mentioned, I think it was 2025. Am I correct on that?
Well, it was two charts. There's an event in late 24 and early 25.
Yes. Okay. Let me pull those up. I actually have those ready because I want to talk about what appears our species will be going through. And I can't find any research, David, I've looked, that has any correlation of anything in an event that we're about to talk about. So that tells me that's very significant. I mean, are we looking at a once in a celestial cycle? I mean, is this something that happens very, very rarely? Have we been here before? So with that, let me pull this up again. And I believe this is where the one that we were talking about, correct?
Yeah, that's the one there. So Jay was trying to understand what the four angry suns were on that one iconography there at the church that they had looked into.
Yes.
Well, these four gas giants perceived from Earth will appear as a square.
So we're talking, I did do a chart
Uranus there for you. Yeah, Uranus, Neptune, Saturn, Jupiter. Now Eris is in the center, and if you put the Earth and then the sun right there, then we're looking at at least the top part of the Kabbalah.
Interesting.
Yeah, those planets plug directly in there. Now that's a little more square. It was pulled out a little more elongated, but what we're looking on the left side is 79 AD. And you'll see the square formation, which I referenced. So using this solar system scope view is much easier than the JPL models.
Wow.
And if we look at that, you're looking directly 9 o'clock position, you'll see the same setup there. It's more about 10 or 11 o'clock. When I did the research for these, this is years apart on this. So not thinking in advance, well, I need to all spin them at the 12 o'clock position, because in 4 years, when I need to match these charts up, I wasn't thinking like that. Which is like, wow, here's the cycle again. It repeats. But you can see the square configuration sets up. Now, history is murky. You might ask what happened. Well, going back to 8,100 years ago, they call it the 8.1K event. I mean, what do we really know about prehistory back 8,000 years prior? I mean, Sumeria starts somewhere 7,000.
About that.
But 1,000 years prior, then there was significant, 7 to 8 degrees Celsius dropping in temperatures across the globe. So what was and had emerged out of the Younger Dryas impact era that had restarted society and civilization, because you got to realize their climate would have been warmer and stable for at least 3,000 years before they got hit with that 8.1K or 8.2K, depends if over that 50 years that you're deciding where the boundary on that is. So think about that just for a second. Like where's that even 3,000 years from 12,500 years ago to say 8,500 years? I'll give you 4,000. Where's that time period? We don't even have a single relic from that time period. So what was the civilization that could have sprung up in 2,000 to 3,000 years of warmth and stable climate? I don't know. There's none. They give
the mysteries of the Sumerians. We don't know where they came from. It was as literally as if they were almost dropped into, the Indus Valley, which, we perceive today as basically the beginnings of Homo sapien, which we know that that's not true, but it was during that period.
And you go back further, into the exit of the Ice Age, somewhere around 21,000 to 18,000 years prior. Then we start to find a few artifacts, and that's when the cave painting times were 21,000 years ago, Lascaux and France. And you can start to find that whole genre of art and artistic creativity and mathematics and understanding of the heavens some 20,000 years ago in caves. But then there's this whole missing part from 20,000 years to 8,000 years. Like, where did that, 12,000 years of time just disappear to? There's no relics, there's no remnants, there's no civilizations, there's no building, architecture, structures, foundations, anything, nothing writing, nothing scripted. And then you head further back in time, and then my whole thing is an ice age would have stabilized the climate. So when we talk about massive ice ages, and I'll agree, they're planet changers, you still would have that 2 miles of ice at the termination point. And once it built to its maximum glaciation, this in our current time would have been about 70,000 years prior. Once it stabilized, it would have stabilized like our climate's pretty stable. Well, not now, but it was the last several thousand years. But think about 40,000 years of stable climate versus a few thousand like we've experienced. Like, what kind of society could have evolved out of 40,000 plus years of stable climate, knowing the planting date and the harvesting dates? Like, during that ice age period is also an unknown. Like, you'd have to look probably 25 south or 25 north to the equator to find those remnants of that society. And they talk about Lemuria being part in, that was without water through Indonesia to northern Australia, etc. But where is that?
And that's also assuming that the current axis of what Earth is right now was the same it was even 70,000 years ago.
Oh, I got Our dogs were terrified of the lightning storm that came through.
Hey, I have
so they were in the room here hanging out, and suddenly it's gone and they want to go back out. But I'm telling you, that electrical front that just passed through here was a very weird one for me. And just it was a night before. We were driving back up. We went to a friend's place up on the lake. And the lightning was so intense and such these big bolts that even when we were driving, it's like, oh, what was that flash? Like, this lightning is getting so much more intense. And today, I was telling Wayne before the show, we lost the internet. So I think the storms are over for now. But it would flash like 5, 6, 7, 8. And then the concussion would come after all those lightning strikes within just like seconds of themselves, 1 or 2 second interval with 8 or 9 bursts of light that you could see individually within that, the eye capturing it. And then all those shock waves would arrive at the same time. And it literally rumbled the house like, boom. You could almost see the dust come out of between the boards here in the log cabin and places. I was like, whoa. Something's upticking right now. So I digress. I had to let the dogs back. They were terrified. They were under the desk, like shaking and stuff. It was like a vicious bout of lightning and thunder this morning earlier.
Well, Dancer would be right there in company. She, and the same thing, the storms that we had a night before last, and they're becoming more electrical.
Yes.
You can almost say plasma, but maybe that may be a little No, I think that's what's happening. All right.
It is.
So
We'll come
when we
into that.
look at, pardon?
We'll come right into that. That's all part of it. What you're going to start
Yeah.
to see.
So in this next one, so boy, when we get back here and we look at
But yeah,
this
let me go back
alignment,
to that chart. I'm sorry, I got distracted talking about ice ages and things. If you go to that, where it was perceived the square there, 79 AD is the last time that we can find the planetary geometry, or basically where the orbits are, where these planets sit in their orbits. Big word to say where the planets are in their orbits all together out of all these 9 planets, where they go. And then when they're spinning, when they come to a certain square formation, you can trace it back and do the orbital diet. There's a lot of free software. Solar System Scope is a good one. The JPL models, that's a free one. I use Universe Sandbox also. That's a paid one though. But you can generally get right back. And I like this just because it's larger instead of seeing just a bunch of dots out there that are hard to reference for people. So you can actually see what the planets look like, see where they're sitting. And the similarity between these two, it's 1 degree of arc off of the 360 degrees out of the entire,
wow,
our arc minutes that go around the 360 there. So it's 1 degree different this time. And what can I say? I mean, electrically, they're going to do something. And I had a really interesting conversation with somebody who was more onto the gravity side of the electromagnetism. And it went something like this, because we were talking about the moon, and gardening with the moon is the way the whole conversation started. And we're like, yeah, you keep talking about this thing out there, these 4 gas giants aligning and maybe electromagnetically looping in on themselves, creating a second toroid field. And he was like, what if it does something as simple as creates a second gravitational force that's equally as larger than the moon, or like 10 times greater than the moon? Like, what would happen with our tides at that point? And then my light bulb went on and said, oh man, I never thought of that before. What if it's simply gravitational and adds a second gravitational tug? What if it's equal to the lunar cycle, but it doubles it, or it intensifies everything lunar on the tides that we see? So Matt, and he was like, it doesn't have to start now and have higher tides coming in. He's like, even if it was only 2 days before the event here in October of 2024, like the 23rd, 24th of that, what if it's just 2 days before and 2 days after, and you get 10 times higher tides coming in? It's like coastal civilization would be absolutely wrecked, and it would take us back. It would take us a century to build back from that at the minimum, because all the seaports would be affected as well. So it doesn't really take much destruction to do a lot of damage.
Our magnetopause is weakening rapidly. I would be curious to see what would happen with another gravitational pull equal or even greater than our moon. I mean, that yeah. And then what's the psychological effect on the species, us as well? I mean, this, if you look what happened in 79 AD, that was basically kind of the beginning of the fall of the Roman Empire, which led us into the Dark Ages. Now, I find this next one that you had here. Let's talk a little bit about this one, because this one is very curious, because it could have a lot of repercussions for our planet. I mean, 70,000 years ago, you mentioned, I think that's when the red dwarf star went through our solar system and wreaked havoc.
Something like that. Craig Simpson, who I talk up with Radiant Creators, we just chat off channel. We do a few interviews together. He calls this chart the fuzz, because he's really into the space debris. And he's been tracking space debris more than I have. And he really is like, David, I think this is the fuzz you're talking about here. You pinpointed to the fuzz. And I was like, what do you mean the fuzz? And he's like, well, you see this space debris, and like the bolide size is increasing. Now I'm talking his words here, but he's the bolide size is increasing. We're seeing a huge amount of long duration meteors, meteorites, and ground strikes coming in than anything prior. So if this chart simply explains, like, after that 2024, we're going to come out of that dual magnetic field. And when we swing in front of the sun, which is the bottom right there, or the bottom left, you can see it both, but there's nothing in front of us. All the gravitational bodies are behind us, pulling everything directly into us for that point there on around April 15th. We are the only thing in front. And if you look at it like the tip of a spear gravitationally, everything is going to get pulled directly into us. And we're going into a heavier, more debris dense region of space anyway.
So in this event here in October, where is it that you see that potentially we're going to have this neutrality of magnetism? Am I describing that correct?
Yeah, 0 point. You're right there, that exact slide, because as you see, the Earth will be at its closest point between the two fields and the sun. I mean, that's as close as it gets. It doesn't get any closer. That's passing through that 0 point, the block wall, the looping fields there. Depends on what the strength is of the outer field, if the toroid. Now, it's really interesting because if you go to SOT.net, they just put up a new article today talking about new research showing that Jupiter's magnetosphere and cavitation waves affected by the sun are something like 100 times further out from Jupiter than they thought it would be. Whoa. So if that's the same, then Neptune's going to be showing that, Saturn will be showing the same. So if to come out and say, oh no, there's going to be no interlooping of fields here, and they just said, oh, things are 100 times wider out than you originally thought. Okay, now do it on each planet and see how much closer they come.
David, I look at this as well, and so the philosopher in me is asking the question. So we see the physicality of this event by the celestial bodies, each of them having their uniquenesses, impacts on the Earth. Then I'm looking at this, well, from the spiritual perspective, what I get intuitively is that I'm hearing opening of portals, dimensions. I mean, this alignment is significant for our solar system, and I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on that, but I can't help but not think that there's something of significance this is for us as our consciousness, as a species.
Yeah, and you got to think, in times past where there wasn't as much control of this dark system that we see on the planet, we would be embracing this, and we would be raising our hands to the heavens in anticipation of this event. And
yes, there would be worldwide events,
celebrating it, welcoming it with open arms and open hearts, open minds. But look how closed it is now. It's almost as if they want everybody completely shut off in darkness, terror, fear, and in a little ball as this thing sweeps by, so you get the least amount of effect from it as possible. In my opinion, like look at the way the world's structured today. And think about those two dualities of you being opening and welcoming and accepting and wanting and, anticipation of it and feeling the energies and blending with them and rising with that as it appears and starts to manifest through its apex. Or as we sit now on the other side of the pendulum in darkness and fear, at least a majority of the planet, anticipation of wars and food shortages and famines and fighting this and that race hates this race. And, it never stops. So, I mean, that whole usage of mind over here to preoccupy and scatter wave it away from complete anticipation, it's going to come with the results are going to be astoundingly different. So see how the world's structured to get you away from that coming in and understanding it and keeping you in fear when it arrives.
David, I got to tell you, and I haven't seen the chat, but I don't know of anyone in the alternative culture, you want to call it New Age, you want to call it whatever you want, not bringing this out. Why? That's what took me aback when I heard you mention it there when we were with Ryder. And I'm thinking to myself again, you just said something that's very significant. In an alternate universe, we would, as a species, be ready. This could be a species-wide event. That this doesn't happen all the time. This doesn't happen, apparently, if you look in here, nearly 2,000 years. Wow. I mean, I think we're missing something here, and I think you're bringing out something that is so significant. And I don't want to just stop there because there's more to this, but you're hitting on something. It's something that I don't understand why this is not spreading, becoming viral, and all of us beginning to prepare for this date. I could be wrong, but anyway, I digress, sir.
Well, look at how many distractions are out there of like the world level kind that would have been, 2-month or 3-month or 6-month story back in the day. Like what's happening currently. If we were to just re-roll the clock and have that same event happen in, say, 1995 or the year 2000 before, 9/11, these headlines now that you're seeing, just one of them would have stuck around for 6 months as like the main thing to focus on. Now you're getting one of those every other day, every 2 days, or there's a new one every day. It's really that level of distraction and anxiety and angst and unknown to the negative side that's being pushed at the moment. And I can see why it's being pushed, because again, I'll bring it just as the most simplest thing. If you understand it's a natural cycle, all power of the elite on this planet stops. None of their programs or plans can move a single 1/8 of 1 inch forward. It can't. Once you realize that it's a natural cycle, then everything that you see out there, from global taxes, control, 15-minute cities, eating insects, everything stops in an instant. And then you're going to reverse it and go, whoa, you just lied to us? Now what? We're not going to believe another single thing you say. And we absolutely 0% participate. And absolutely every time you say something, we're going to push back with even more ferocity, saying no to the things you're trying to implement. So that's the whole key. They need to keep it in a man-made fashion for everything. The very second
we're
that the
hitting on
world
something
wakes up
very
to its natural.
Yeah, this is huge, my friend. This is huge. We have a year and 4 months to prepare for this. I think and this is just opinion, that the elite are shaking in their boots, an old expression would say, because if enough of us humans find out about this and begin to prepare for this, it could absolutely alter the whole agenda. My friend, I applaud you because I believe you've hit on something that is 50 years of indoctrination in Christianity, ordained minister preaching the gospel. It was at this period in 79 AD that whole construct began to be introduced. And so it's just my point of view, but we've been in this dark age, and I look at what's coming. And for me, my spirit kind of goes saying, hey, Steiger, this might be the entrance back out. Just opinion.
Or the beginning of a new cornerstone
Yes,
of
sir.
energy
Yeah.
that will not allow these darker vibrations to hold state in our world. And see, that's the thing. It's all about vibration and frequency. Currently, they're trying to trap people in a lower vibration frequency when this higher power wave swings through.
Bingo. And then when I look at this one in itself, I mean,
the
fuzz. I love it. I can actually see the graphic on that. And that's troubling because, it means that the heavens will definitely become alive, and you could use the expression of an angry dragon. Behold, I saw 1/3 of the heavens fall. Well, it makes kind of sense if you're
describes exactly that. That's a perfect representation. Yeah, that's exactly what I would expect right there at that point on around April. Yeah, there would be things coming in day, night, terrifying them. I mean, I would be. I'm expecting it, so I'm more in tune with it. That's why I bought a mountain property, so I can be on top of the mountain witnessing this with the plasma displays that should accompany it. But
oh yeah, the
amount of debris coming in that's going to hit the ground is going to be yeah, people are going to be fearful. Let's say that.
Yes. Well, the scripture says that there will be boulders falling out of the sky. These will be the point where it says that man will cry out for death, but death will not come. I mean, and I'm looking at this and it goes, well, if you're at the end of the suction cup, so to speak, guess what? You're going to be the collector of all that fuzz. Just saying. So talk about this graph, sir.
Well, let me come back for a second, because you think about the Iraq War and the initial, Gulf War that we went to, Operation Desert Storm.
Mm-hmm.
They bombed the Iraqis for 30 days straight with just nonstop munitions, just shaking the earth to the point they're like, we want to surrender. We can't have it. Our eardrums are ruptured. Again, their lobes of their brains were not behaving. They were just, please stop. We surrender. We don't fight. Just stop the shaking. Can you imagine that going through 6-8 months of that as we come around the front of the sun, and it's just things coming in from space and there's no way to turn it off? That's where you get the people begging for it, but they won't. That what you're describing there exactly to the 100th degree describes what that field, what we're going to roll through with that right there.
That's now, what my spirit said.
The unknown is, okay, when we come through that first circle on it, once we get back behind the sun again, somewhere around, fall or winter in the northern hemisphere, we'll be protected from all that. That'll cease for a little bit. Now, the four gas giant swells also moved more in their orbit, so won't be pulling everything as directly in as it would be during this one particular lineup in time. So you have to think the Earth's going to spin around in this orbit and continue on its yearly, and it'll come back behind the sun. Well, Uranus and Jupiter are also going to swing further out, and that'll be an opportunity to pull magnetically more of the debris away from directly into us. Yeah. It'll pull it off to the right or left. We'll still probably have some debris coming in 2026, but it'll be far, far, far less than 25. And as we go 2027, that magnetic field will dissipate and break further, and those planets, Saturn will swing around further, and there'll be a lot more pushing it off to that direction versus drawing it straight into us. This is going to be fast. It's going to be ferocious. It's going to be like an eye of a storm swinging over you, an eye of a hurricane. Cat 6+, tornadoes jumping out of that, and it'll be gone as quickly as it arrives. It'll be like a 2-year event that will reset history. But then, you look 2,000 years in the future and you come up to, a time 2,000 years from now. How would they describe the event? Like, we don't know much about 79 AD. We know Vesuvius erupted, but truly, what's the history of that time period?
I can tell you from the religion aspect.
This happened then too, and they just made up a timeline because they knew it would be so terrifying for those in the future that understood it's a cycle.
Yeah, yeah. I can hear my prophecy teacher, Hilton Sutton. He passed over decades ago, but in his teachings, he described this period of time in which this is the time that he saw this happening around the year 2030. And for us back in 1978, 2030 was, Star Trek future. And we didn't have this information. No one did. I'm sure it existed because we were there before, and here we are now again. And if you read, for instance, the Corbin Bible, the destroyer, this is all very interesting and correlating. Wow.
Well, Wayne, how do you think human behave now? Go into the human behavior during these events. Like, how is the human going to respond to the stimulus, do you think?
Well, if history's any record for us, we're going to go insane. We will literally go, in the vast majority of the population they'll have diminished cognitive abilities, rationale of thought. And if you tie that into an era of shortages, depletion, then you get the survival mentality kicks in. And we've seen this. We know that if you go without food for 3 days, most people will begin to have hunger. Your videos are replete with this. It's just, so to answer your question, and we can see it back in history. I mean, it was the same thing that happened 2,000 years ago when the pinnacle of what we would say the Roman Empire and the pinnacle of our knowledge, it diminished very quickly. I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's strange to me to see from what I see happening in the world on the world stage, that nothing in the media today is of a positive nature of a bright tomorrow. It's a very dark today, and it doesn't seem to get better. So are the elite, are they aware of this? Is there an occultic knowledge that this is well known?
I'm going to say yes.
I'm right there with you. I would agree. I think this has been known.
But just,
which leads me, go ahead.
No, but just put it in a simple perspective here for a second. even if we only use the last, say, 600 years of time, let's go back to, say, okay, 1400s, and we'll leave it at that. We'll go 600 years back. How much of that time had the navies sponsored by the Vatican, paid for by the church, run around this planet and pillaged and boxed up and repatriated all of the history of most of the cultures across the planet? They know for sure, way better than anybody. And then with the satellites, what they're getting for satellite instrumentation and what's being shown, what you can get on Space Weather Live and these type of, Enlil spiral updates, and when the solar, the CMEs will arrive and this sort of thing, and the KP index. That's child's play. When you go into the 10.7 centimeter flux and you get deeper into the different isotopes and irons, especially showing different, heat changes in the photosphere on the sun. I mean, that stuff's delayed when it's released or not released at all. But imagine like the trove that they have of data to back up what would be the timelines and written record. So, using the written records, then you could look for, instrumentation data to sort of sync it up with, all right, well, they look for these changes, this started to happen. Volcanic eruptions, we have all this extra water in the atmosphere now from the Hunga Tonga eruption, 10% more moisture in the atmosphere now, playing in on where the cloud cells are moving or dragging heavier across the equator and saying, yeah, it's there. But if you go to the cloud cell map, that's the super important one, because that eruption took place at 20 degrees south latitude below the equator, but so much water has gone up around the entire planet now. What they're finding is the drag at the had these cells converging where the equator are, those are so much denser and heavier that he's getting these massive amounts of just biblical flooding across that area there, because all the moisture had kind of coalesced now, and the pressure difference and the heating difference that drives the pressure difference is really getting gummed up in the works because there's so much more moisture in the atmosphere.
And if you add the fact that the Buford Gyre is now releasing,
I don't know about that one. Can you fill me in a bit?
Yeah, Ben Davidson.
Gyre out there, or whatever.
It's been holding back all that cold, fresh water, I guess, for nearly a decade now, and the evidences are now showing that it is releasing. So we're expecting, diminished flow in the North Atlantic Oscillation. And if that comes to pass, then it's going to get cold real quick. Real quick.
Ice Age Europe, huh?
Yeah, yes, yeah, exactly. And I want to go back on something you had mentioned before about this shift in energy. There is a prophecy that says that the day is coming where men will have their hearts will fail, sudden heart attacks. Well, we're now seeing a direct correlation from when these CMEs are hitting the earth in these geomagnetic electrical storms from our sun, that it has a direct correlation to cardiac rhythms. It's all tying together. So,
think about that for a second. If that were to change orders of magnitude, anybody who had a heart condition, it's almost like survival of the fittest, like nature is wiping out all the defects out of the human race and going to leave 10 million pure, undefected humans as breeding pairs to start over again, or something like that. Not in a World Economic Forum sense to, maybe depopulate and put you all in cities, but perhaps that's the way nature cleanses the DNA pool itself to allow something to continue to come on the planet. Although, the Homo sapiens sapien is only 400,000 years old. But if you go further back, you start to see different types of Australopithecus, and we got the Neanderthals. And, how did the Neanderthals and Denisovans blend in at the same time that the Homo sapiens sapien timelines were moving forward? And, trace back Lucy, whatever, but, primate hominids, these sort of thing. At times in the past, there was many as 6 hominid species on our planet coexisting at any one time. Now, I currently believe that there's at least 2, ourselves and what you consider the bipedal hominids in the forest, Sasquatch, etc. And there's also very documented and well-known pygmy types of things running around in tropical climates, especially Indonesia gets a lot of reports of that. So you could say 3 at the current rate if you believe in some, reports that, because you'd have to stop logging and do all types of things. If these bipedal hominids in our forest were classified as a species, just like the way you even do forestry would stop. You'd have to, the entire economy of the planet would grind to a halt because suddenly we got different species in our forest. Like what? And they make us they so outclass us at every
I'm
single
still,
way, shape, or
when I
form.
think about Neanderthal and the time when you were saying there were 6 different homogeneuses of us. And it's still odd is how did we somehow become the top of the pyramid of these other species of us that have been around. I don't know. I understand that if you look at Neanderthals to Cro-Magnon going back, we're talking potentially millions of years. I mean, we really are the new kid on the block.
But how many cycles of this cycle of cleansing of DNA has morphed that into the dominant species moving forward to the next? So if we were to be, if our DNA were to be scrubbed clean into no defects, genetic defects whatsoever, and there'd only be the purest of DNA left on the planet to restart our species, like what would that be quantified as? Because we would evolve, it would be a new species that would evolve from us.
There are those who contend that that's what's happening right now, is that the next version of the sapiens is already here. Some believe that it's if you look at the Titans in Silicon Valley, the mad rush is to be able to transfer the human consciousness into a matrix that allows the continuation of thought, the collection of memories in a manner where they don't see death. I mean, is this what we're seeing? Is this the transhumanism? It seems to be rush. I mean, I look at this and it's just a fact. I mean, our medical industry, the knowledge that we have for the last 100+ years has been predicated on petroleum-based solutions. And we've seen the effect that it's had on us as a species. Now we're coming into where genetics is coming into the next role. I contend that the minute that genetics takes rule in the area of advanced biomedicine, that it's going to alter our species fundamentally. I don't believe that the sapiens will be represented in that. They'll have our DNA to work on, but I think sapiens as a whole, we will become that of the Neanderthals and the Cro-Magnons, etc.
Yeah, that would be because imagine if you are considering going down that road, imagine if your consciousness gets plugged into the new threads where Zuckerberg's controlling your consciousness and you're not allowed to think about that. So they strip that memory out and you're left with like a core reptilian brain memory, and that's all you're allowed to retain out of that. And that's the way you'll exist until some other super wave of energy comes through and disrupts that technology and perhaps releases the well of souls or something.
When you talk like that, I mean, I keep on thinking about this conversion of, when I was in Christianity, people would say, well, that's called being saved. And you're going,
skip the long way.
Have you really thought this thing out now? It's like, okay, well, that could be, because it's I mean, Dave, the hour's almost come and gone. It's so fascinating what you have shown here, because I wish I had more, and I'm endeavoring to study more, because you have hit onto something significant that I'm trying to tie it in, and I have bookshelves over here of the prophecies in many different cultures, many different times of our species, and they all have this correlating effect that there seems to be this funnel in which we're being funneled into. Now, no matter how much we want to go enough a different direction, it seems like predestination has stepped in. But what you just showed me, I don't know what it is. It's formulating, it's coalescing in my mind's eye. There is something significant. This is powerful. And
on that level alone, if you go back to the ozone depletion chart that I just put together, or was it yesterday or the day before?
Yeah,
You know,
let
the
me get that
Hungatonga
pulled up.
eruption blasted so much water vapor in the atmosphere, it went up 180,000 feet. And when you get these ice crystals up in the mesosphere, it creates surfaces for breakdown of ozone. So what we're seeing is it's July 2021 on the left side. Now, the more blues and the darker blues and that sort of things means less ozone, less Dobson units. What you're really looking for in a healthy ozone layer is like the reds, like we see in the Northern Hemisphere, very dark yellows, oranges, that sort of thing. But on the right side is what we're seeing with the Hungatonga effect, where all the extra mesospheric ice crystal clouds have allowed more catalyst breakdown of ozone to occur. So this is exactly the same time of the year, but you can see that it's quite different in how much ozone has been depleted already. Now, the maximum ozone will occur somewhere around late September, early October. Every year, it's a cycle too. We'll get to like a very depleted column in the center there. But this year, I believe it's going to affect barley production in the Southern Hemisphere, as well as the insect life. And there's just going to be a lot more UVB radiation striking the ocean surface. Insects are very affected by that different kind of light, UVB. And also barley is the #1 affected crop with UVB excess.
Now, David, in a former life, you were actually in, as I understand, into the coffee business and the international trading.
Yeah, I used to buy coffee down in Myanmar.
Okay.
So that's where I learned about this whole thing. Now you guys put it
Yeah,
in
I was gonna
perspective.
say.
I was the Al Gore poster child of global warming. After I saw that movie, I bought that thing hook, line, and sinker. But once I started buying coffee in Myanmar, formerly known as Burma, when we were up there, and it was about 1,200 foot elevate or 1,200 meter elevation, and they were saying that, you know, prior, when their grandfathers and great grandfathers were commercializing coffee in the 1880s, that they also had cold damage to the crops. And when we were there, there was cold damage to the coffee farms. Top leaf kill, the bean density was off. You had to overplant the new plantings in the field because they were already accounting for some to be killed from the cold after they replanted them in the first year out of the nursery into the actual field. So that just sent me on the quest, like, wait a minute, if it's going to get hotter, why in this tropical country is it getting cooler and the coffee is getting damaged by cold? And then they told us the stories about the 1880s. And then I started to look back there. Oh, whoa, those seem to be. And then I learned about solar cycles. And then I met John Casey. And then suddenly off to the races. Never came back. Couldn't lie to myself. That's the greatest travesty. Talk about committing suicide would be to lie back to yourself, to put yourself back in that box once you know some of the truth. And to put yourself back into that normalcy, to not butt heads with anybody or not have a different opinion, that you would lie to yourself and put yourself back in that box. I think that's a form of suicide as well.
Well put. Well put. Wow. I mean, we could just go on for another hour or two on all of this.
That one there, if I could stop you, if you go back, anybody, one more chart back. Yeah, that one. Anybody who is into astrology there, if you could pass this on to anybody who understands astrology at a much deeper level, you just never ever see this type of tightness there. And this is a very special and very unique chart. And that is for April 16th of 2025. And you can almost see that V4 or that arrow formation of how the magnetism would be pulling everything into the earth. So
I notice your time is interesting as well.
3:33 a.m. And that's not even me. Once I just cut those charts, I was just going around cutting them because I wasn't looking at the timestamps. I was looking for the perfection in the geometry to show that arrow pulling everything into us, as the earth being the tip of the arrow magnetically, everything pulled in. There was nothing about the timestamp. I noticed that later on after I was when working with the charts. I was only looking for the geometry in the planets, but it is what it is.
It is what it is. Listen, there's a number of people I could think that with your permission, I can send you the individual slide, and love to get your opinion. And David's contact information is in the information, so get with him, and because I'd like to know as well. This is a very interesting chart.
And I have one for the October 23rd, 2024, and it's more of like a pentagram or pentagon in that one.
Wow.
I'll have to send that to you. I just sent that one because I was talking about the fuzz on this.
This is very interesting. And I am not as verse, but yeah. Wow. Okay. And
Well,
I
good
think
luck,
that,
everybody. You need to get ready. That's the whole point of talking about this is, you might look at it like, oh, everything. No, we're still here. Wayne and I are having this conversation because we've survived through these before. But those ancestors who got us here were the ones who prepared.
yeah,
It's as simple as that. A bit of simple preparation of getting your food, getting your seeds, getting extra tools, get with your community, get some basic medical stuff. How would you live in the 1860s as a pioneer? Like, we're going to go back through that for a bit, and then life should reemerge. And even at our age, by the time this ends and society reemerges, when we in our 80s will see a fully functional society once again. It's just, we're going to get squashed down here for a minute in terms of our very fragile ecosystems and supply chains. But after that, the resiliency of us as a species is going to go into full action. And we'll have like a D-Day kind of spurred to action to get our society rebuilt so we can function in normal lives again. We'll see that.
yeah.
But we're going to go down through the V first. We're going to walk through the valley of the shadow of death first.
And you talk about community. It's amazing. We moved here a year ago, and there is a community. It's tight, and it's like, well, if anything happens, this is who to go to. This is what can be done, and it's that type of camaraderie with the community that is, whatever's coming is going to allow you to, like I said, not only survive but thrive out of this. David, I look at it, I'll be learning a lot of new skills. I mean, right now I'm refreshing in all my carpentry skills, the gardening, we're looking at getting ready to bring in chickens and other things to the property. And it's a learning process, and it's one that is as ancient as our people, as humanity is, but yet it's amazing how completely new technology is the way I look at it. So, that's how that works. Yeah.
More minds make it easier to work with, easier
It
to
does.
repair things. Like, the more hands you have out there. How do you think the Amish build a barn in an afternoon?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, for me and you, that's months plural with a crew.
And heavy machinery on top of that,
No, they're handsaw and everything, but it's just men who just take their time. They know the angles and they practice it, so much where they can get through, and they have, horse driven sawmills and these sort of things, and water power and using pulleys to, sets of pulleys to negate some of the weight. And they've really wired it out. I mean, I live near,
and they didn't have
community.
OSHA or any union there at all. I mean, it's like
None.
David, gonna have you back on. I tell you, my friend, it has, there is so much to be consumed here, and you have a wealth of knowledge and understanding. And if there's one thing I will always remember you for, particularly, is what you've brought out for all of our consciousness. We're about to see two, what I believe are fundamental events. And my nearly 10 years on YouTube, when I look at these dates, I can't help but not think of, for instance, the Deagle.com, and all the predictions of something happening, particularly to the United States. That's where you and I live. And I'm going, well, wait a minute. Now I'm seeing something that you just brought out in the heavens. I can see this cosmologically taking place. And then I have all this other, anecdotal evidence, maybe, and they seem to have a tie-in. You know what? If I'm in Vegas, you're not going to hold me back in making that bet, because I can see where that bet's going. Just saying. David, you want to say something before we go? Again, thank you, sir, so much for you coming on. And like I said, this has been a classroom.
Yeah, once I get this interview, I want to post it up on my channel too, because I thought it was a really good discussion. And, again, share this with your friends and your family. And this explains why a lot of today's world that you're seeing with distraction and narrative and fear and all this, it's to distract you from this. And then if you understand that it's not a hopeless time, that it's one of the most hopeful times, because we can break the reins of all this control and central banking and these power systems that have held us down for so long. That we're coming into a faster moving energy area of space, and our galactic or the spiral arm of our galaxy. It's literally a cycle also of a 12,000 year cycle of we come into faster vibrating energies where these dark entities can't hold their vibrational state anymore. It's like the great white shark trying to grab your leg and pull you back down for that one last time. But embrace these changes and know that this is something that sets humanity free. And you got to look at it from that point. The fear is where they want to lock you. And the distraction is to keep you from being able to even go out and start.
Yeah.
Like how many people are going to surf the news instead of actually going out and putting a raised bed in or tilling up the land and trying to plant some corn or whatever it is, or make a compost pile or, build a chicken run or whatever. You got to do some action. And all these things we're seeing currently across the media space is to keep you in a state of inaction and helplessness. When you need to know that's the complete opposite. Tonight, the massive rapid action is where you can be at all times, as long as you let the distractions go. It's a great time to be alive. And please,
it is, and
it's the greatest opportunity in human history. So I'm excited to be alive. I'm so blessed, so grateful, so wow, to think about all of these things and gratitude of being alive to witness all this right now and knowing what this inbound. So when I see that plasma displays in the skies, like just giving thanks for being able to see this and embrace the energy.
Bingo. That, my friend, you just hit on something. You're one of the very few people that I watch and see, but you've done something here that I don't see, and it should be something more. And that is that heartfelt gratitude. It's the attitude of gratitude. It's not woe is me and all is lost. No, you were here. You came in for a specific purpose. This is it. Enjoy it. Watch with wonder. You're going to carry that with you through the epochs of your existence, but you were here at this moment, at this time. Like you said, we should all be grateful for that. And if we took that gratefulness, David, and combined it into this October date, 2024, you just may well have hit onto something that will have ramifications for our species for thousands of years. I'll leave it at that.
Bye for now.
Thank you, everybody. Much love to y'all. And we will see you tomorrow with Ryder and with Jay. Going to talk about, JFK. So we'll see y'all then. Much love, everybody.